this evening. We're talking about those proposals by France and Germany in the last hour to restore stability and to restore competitiveness and growth in the Eurozone. Angela Merkel and President Sarkozy standing side by side earlier this afternoon. But the reaction on Wall Street hasn't been good. Markets already declining on the news. And my guests here are all united in their belief that the proposals don't go nearly far enough. Well, joining us now from Berlin is Dr. Christian Deubner. He's a professor at the IES. Let's get his view on those proposals. Hello, apologies, I'm being told we don't have Dr. Deubner. So let's pick up what we were talking about before, about this need for more governance, more than just a committee that meets twice a year and is overseen by the Commission President Herman Van Rompuy. Ambrose Evans-Pritchard raised some concerns about that not being democratic. Ali Fatimi, you say it's absolutely necessary, and now is the time to do it.
Well, you know, there are always going to be resistance. This is the old story about European Union democratic deficit. But who is going to object? Because right now France and Germany are in front. Most probably they will be carrying most of the heavy weight and do the heavy lifting. And the other countries are not in a position to object as much as they would under normal circumstances. What I consider leadership is exactly to come up with those more difficult decisions and get them through. Yes, there is difficulties, but remember, both Chancellor Merkel and President Sarkozy have far more political power than Obama has, because in Europe you have party system, and also these are majorities, at least in Germany, until they lose the Senate. And I think
But they've also both got elections on the horizon.
Well, they do, but I think the voters will judge them on the result of their actions. Maybe right now it would be difficult for the voters to go along. But again, I mean, I don't think like a politician. I'm an academic. But basically, in response to Mr. Ambrose, I just want to say that if there's one time that one can do it, perhaps is now, because there is a crisis. Remember, euro is today the second reserve currency. The idea that they go back or they abandon euro and so on is unthinkable. The world economy now depends, the reserves of the countries. And until China comes in and is ready to play a role like the US did at the Bretton Woods, Europe has to solve its own problems. And these are the two leaders who are in forefront. And when they come through like today, I think it's going to disappoint the markets.
Ambrose Evans-Pritchard, then it seems that we discussed this last week, didn't we? We're at a crossroads now, and it seems like a very real choice between either deeper fiscal union, deeper governance, however complex that might be in terms of democratic institutions, and abandoning the euro because it simply is not working for these economies.
Yeah, let me just say just quickly to Ali's point. I mean, we're on a bit of a slippery slope here, where we have, EU leaders from different countries ordering sovereign parliaments to make budget cuts. We've seen this has caused a lot of anger in Greece and in Italy. Silvio Berlusconi said, we feel like an occupied government. And in fact, the leader of the Northern League in Italy, said that the EU authorities are trying to bring down the Italian government. These are the kinds of accusations that are flying around here. It begins to subvert the democracies of the constituent states of Europe, and that's very dangerous. But, to your point about, whether we go the whole way to fiscal union or let it break up, I mean, this has been on everybody's minds now for several months. And, we're getting closer and closer to the point where decisions have to be made. I still believe that the European Central Bank, if it did what the US Federal Reserve has done and went in and bought 2 trillion or more of bonds, not just Italian and Spanish bonds, but bonds for the whole Eurozone, unsterilized, as they say in the jargon, and just had massive stimulus, they could pull the whole economy, out of this sort of mini slump, get growth going again, and that would buy a lot of time. That would cause a lot of trouble for Germany. Germany would overheat. It would have an inflation that was uncomfortably high, but that's the price they may have to pay if they want to keep this union. So the central bank, the European Central Bank, could do this.
But would that not be a short-term measure? I mean, aren't investors aware that when you have investment like that, it needs to be long-term and it needs to be regular, and they know that that's a one-off payment that will not be coming again?
Well, investors wouldn't like it if they thought that the ECB was simply monetizing debt and engaging in just naked inflation. But at the moment, the money supply is contracting in Europe. The narrow M1, to use a technical term, real M1 deposits have been falling at 1930s rates in Italy and other countries in southern Europe. They're actually contracting in France and Germany as well. That's not a very good situation. So just on its own merits, they should be cranking up the money supply. Willem Buiter, a former policymaker here in Britain and now head of chief economist for Citigroup, said he thought that the ECB could do $1 trillion of bond purchases absolutely without any inflationary risk whatsoever. These kinds of measures would do it. So I'm not saying, there is a third way. You don't have to go either to fiscal union or breakup. The central bank could play this role, but that requires, essentially tearing up the rule book and becoming very, very creative. And doing something that really the central banks hate to do. But I mean, I'm afraid that they're the last resort at this point.
Thomas Clow, what's your view on the possibility of a third way? Look, it doesn't have to be abandon the euro or develop a United States of Europe, as Ambrose called it.
Well, the Germans in particular are already very nervous about what the ECB has done, rightly in my view, to stabilize the situation as much as it could. Without going to the, if you like, extreme in terms of its track record so far that Ambrose was suggesting. And clearly the ECB has already torn up part of its rule book and has been unorthodox and innovative. I can't see, quite frankly, German public opinion and German political opinion agreeing, accepting the scenario that was just outlined, with the ECB going that far and inflation being stoked up in Germany. Quite possibly, if it came to that, the German preference would be for a deeper fiscal union. Because tampering with, if you like, the ECB's mission immediately sounds alarm bells going back to the great inflation of post-World War II, but especially the great inflation of the early 20s, which of course destroyed many German livelihoods in economic terms. So I don't think that's, even if in purely economic terms it might make sense, I don't think it's a politically viable option.
We certainly don't want to return to a high inflationary environment, do we?
Yeah, you see, I just want to say something. It seems like calming down the markets is becoming the major preoccupation of everyone, which is one of the problems. But the real problems in Europe are problems of solvency and lack of competitivity. In other words, Europe is not competitive. And unless productivity increases, unless there is real economic growth and employment, all these problems are being pushed aside. And I didn't hear anything in today's statements which would open the road in that direction. Increasing taxes is what most European politicians know how to do. That's not going to solve the problem. What we really need is some commitment on labor market reform and doing something for the real economy, because these are all symptoms. I agree that initially they have to do something. There's like they're in the emergency room and they have this problem of they have to reassure the markets. But these are all symptoms. The real problem is lack of labor productivity in Europe. And
right, longer term structural problems, absolutely. Now, another point is, and obviously a lot of people have been weighing in on what is the solution to the Eurozone crisis in recent days. One of them, the former British Prime Minister and Chancellor Gordon Brown, he argued in the Financial Times that European leaders failed to grasp how badly affected European banks were by the last financial crisis in 2008, and that still hasn't been addressed. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's Mr. Brown's hang-up with the banks. But I think when they had the stress test, European banks are not in any worse position, I think, than American banks. There is a problem with all the banking system. But remember, what is it that banks are holding? Most of the financial papers from these governments which are insolvent. So how do you go about the banking problem without having solved the other problem, which is the trust in the market and trust in the ability of the politicians to stand up and come up with what is required?
And what are your thoughts on the banks, Ambrose? Has that problem been addressed?
Well, I agree with Gordon Brown on this in many ways. I mean, the IMF has repeatedly said in a series of reports that the Europeans have been far too slow to bite the bullet on the banking problems. I mean, the Americans were much faster to sort of recapitalize their banks and get tough and deal with these problems and clean it all up. They haven't completely succeeded, but they're further along the road. And the Europeans sort of kind of pushed this under the rug and swept it under the rug, and they really haven't dealt with it. And it's now waiting to pop, actually, and that's the problem. And this is why there's such, tension in the European stock markets. We've seen with bank shares in Italy and with in France last week. That is all the residual tensions that would, from the previous crisis, that the issues that haven't been dealt with, everybody knows they haven't been dealt with. Many of the banks, by the way, are still holding the old debt, like Icelandic debt, which is 3 years ago, that collapsed and became worthless, as if it was at face value. Well, if you've got all these European banks holding stuff at face value that's worth almost nothing, and they're not becoming clean about it, there's this great suspicion. Nobody really knows how bad the sort of the cancer is, and that's sort of eating away at confidence.
Dr. Christian Deubner is now with us, I believe, from Berlin. Let's bring in a fresh voice to the debate. Everybody here seems to be saying that Sarkozy and Merkel didn't go nearly far enough today to address the Eurozone crisis. What are your thoughts?
Well, in fact, I too think that we have not really addressed the issue of calming the markets, which is a catchword of the moment. I think it is important to speak about the longer term strategy for the Eurozone, and I think it is important to differentiate the two from each other. What should we do for the moment to calm the market, but this cannot be the same what we do for the longer term. So when I see, for example, in the list of the decisions today that there should be more gouvernement économique, I think we already have, since the decisions of March of this year, structure set for something which may be a gouvernement économique. But to be quite frank, I do not think it will work. I think the last decade proves to us that inside Europe, with governments, with sovereign governments being responsible to their own parliaments, we will not have this kind of centrally steered fiscal policy coordination which many envisage. And I do not even think that it is to be wished for. Why should we start deepening European integration after this crisis with fiscal policy? Fiscal policy is just only about giving to the ones and taking away from the others. It's one of the most contentious, conflict-rich, conflict-prone areas in politics, where you don't have any other areas around with which you can play politically. No, what we need is to have more community policies in defense, let's say, in building big infrastructures,
right,
in aiding other areas inside Europe, which cost a lot of money, in which funds can flow, but which we can organize in a
more investment, more project. All right. I wanted to get reaction, maybe from you, Ambrose, to another opinion out today. The investor George Soros, he says the solution is simple: just kick Greece and Portugal out of the Eurozone. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, firstly, what has Portugal done wrong? I mean, Portugal's actually behaved pretty well.
It's needed a bailout, hasn't it? It needed a bailout. It wasn't balancing its books properly. It had to go for help.
Well, wait a second here. I mean, there's this kind of German narrative of what's happened, which is a kind of morality tale that, the Northerners have been virtuous and the feckless Latins in the South have just squandered, all the advantages of EMU and have built up all these debts. That's not actually what happened. There may have been bad behavior in Greece, but the problem in Portugal and Italy is entirely different. Portugal's actually been pretty well behaved for about 7 or 8 years. Italy's got one of the best fiscal profiles in the developed world. It's got a primary surplus. Its aggregate debt's actually quite modest. It's lower than many countries in the OECD, much lower than Britain, Japan, and America, by the way, and about the same as France. The issue is structural. The issue is a currency misalignment, that these countries in the south have too strong a currency against Germany and against the rest of the world, given their competitive condition. That's the real problem. So it's not that they behave badly and kicking them out. I mean, and what? Secondly, that would cause a terrible crisis, because you'd immediately have a chain reaction. People would say, well, which country's next? Which country's next? They would then go after the next in line, which whether it would be Ireland or whether it would be Spain or whoever.
So you think Mr. Soros has it wrong on this point?
Well, I don't. I mean, I don't know. I didn't see exactly what he said. I think that's a very dangerous policy. Now, you could ring fence it, I suppose, if you just drew a line in the sand saying we're going to do this, we're going to defend all the other countries or whatever we've got. Or maybe you could make it work. I don't see the justice of acting in that fashion.
Right.
I mean, I feel the better course of action, one proposed last night by Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz, is that if Germany is not willing to sign up to full fiscal union, Eurobonds, etc., then it should withdraw from monetary union as the cleanest option.
To kick the Germans out.
Let them withdraw in an orderly,
let them leave of
fashion.
their own free will.
I think they'd be delighted to do that. But from a fiscal point of view. But remember, the problem is that such suggestions as kicking Greece out or Germany dropping out, these things I think are fantasy. These are fiction. The real problem, basically, where I disagree with our colleague from Berlin, is that you can't resolve this problem without having some fiscal governance in Europe. There is no way. No amount of investment can resolve the problem that the world is facing with right now, and Europe is facing with, by just increasing investment projects and so on. Under normal situations, yes. How is increasing investment going to solve the problem of these nations that certainly cannot go out in the market, and the spread in what they borrow versus the German interest rate is widening? The only way I would say that to get out of the present problem, I agree with what he said, that we have two problems. One is calming down the markets. Yes, there you can. The only way you can do that is to have more political union, more common fiscal policy than less.
All right, Ali Fatimi, you're going to get.
agree.
I'm afraid. I'm terribly sorry, Dr. Deubner. We've run out of time. We're going to have to end on that note. So Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy, if you're watching, that's what our panel of experts think of your policies today. Catherine Nicholson will be here with more financial news for you after this short break. Another debate right here at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for watching.